Oh howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Every league, I take a look at the way that the metagame is shaping up around about the second week of the league. Normally I aim for day 10, this league I got sick a few days into the league, and as a result this is a little bit delayed, but I'm trying to capture the meta as it was on day 10, so this video is as similar as possible to previous versions of the series. I want to have a look at what builds are doing well in the context of the softcore trade-enabled Affliction League. Now, I want to quickly recap the methodology I use in these videos, and this will be basically the same as it's been in previous videos in this series. So Grinding Gear Games published the ladder. This is a list of the top 15,000 characters by XP, and the cutoff to be on this is now well into level 97, and it'll soon tick over to level 98. What this does is it gives you an overview of popular build archetypes, and there's a strong correlation between popularity and success, although I do think it needs to be stated that this is not absolutely always the case. For example, a couple of leagues ago in the Sanctum League, there was a very popular build guide that came out in Korea that was for a Hexblast Miner build. This was really good and it became very popular amongst people who encountered it, but this was mostly the Korean language segment of the PathOfExile player base. Those who do not speak Korean, myself included, generally weren't aware of it for some time afterwards, and then it became one of the more popular starters in 3.21 and then again in 3.22. So you can have a very good build that a lot of people don't know about. That's definitely happened before, it's going to happen again, and it's probably happening right now. But there still is a strong correlation between popularity and success, and that's what we're going to go off here. Now the website POE.ninja scrapes the data from the ladder, and they've had some recent improvements to their aggregation, which means that now they're not just capturing the top 15,000 people at any given time, but they're also capturing pretty much anyone that's ever been on the ladder, plus people who are actively involved in trading. Now there are 3 hard mode rule sets that people play in PathOfExile to varying amounts. These are Solo Self-Found, Hardcore and Ruthless, and people play with all different combinations of those. Anytime that any of those hard mode flags are turned on, that will have a big impact on the builds that become popular. We're going to be looking at all of those hard modes being turned off first, but it is worth having a quick glance at what's been popular in the other game modes as well, because anything that works well in Hardcore will work well in Softcore and feel tanky there. Anything that works well in Solo Self-Found is probably going to be even easier to put together if you're playing in the Trade League environment. So let's talk quickly about buffs and nerfs. The biggest change you will see here is the changes that took place because of the Juggernaut and the less popular Chieftain versions of Righteous Fire being pretty much obliterated by the 3.23 changes. A quick recap of what those changes were. In 3.22, Righteous Fire provided damage in 2 different ways. One of these was a percentage of your player's life total plus your player's energy shield total. And for most of the Juggernaut and Chieftain versions of Righteous Fire, this aspect was pretty inconsequential. Then the rest of the damage came from the gem level of Righteous Fire. Fast forward to 3.23, and this has been changed so that the gem doubles down on that life plus energy shield scaling. That's been increased massively, but all of that flat damage that's scaled up with gem level, all of that is gone. Now these changes to Righteous Fire actually did not detrimentally affect the Inquisitor versions of Righteous Fire. Those are arguably stronger than they were in 3.22. But there's only 100 characters that are level 97 plus that are using the Fire Trap plus Righteous Fire plus Replica Soul Tether plus Uchula's Hunger tech that I think is probably one of the best ways to play Righteous Fire on a budget now. It's worth noting though that Chieftain was underrated pretty much all of last league, and so there are a lot of people playing it because it is still quite a fine Ascendancy. It's just that they're not playing it with Righteous Fire. Other 3.22 top builds remain fine, with the exception of Impending Doom, which was basically deleted by a bug fix. Now the reason for that was that Spell Cascade and Awakened Spell Cascade had an unintended functionality when combined with gems that scaled their area tremendously when scaling gem level. This interaction was never intended, but it was kind of needed for Impending Doom Vixen's Entrapments builds to be good, and when it was patched in 3.23 so that Awakening Spell Cascade now hits the intended area of the screen, rather than hitting less of the screen but hitting that area multiple times, that ended up being a killing blow to that build. It's not that Impending Doom is completely unplayable now, it's just that it's now far behind the meta builds and people aren't really interested in running it. There's also been what I term a number of knowledge shifts around items. Knowledge shifts are where an item doesn't get buffed, but it sees its use go up tremendously because of knowledge propagating throughout the player base or other things that popularize it in various ways. Defensive armor preferences continue to evolve in the PathOfExile meta. None of these items have gotten any better than they were a couple of leagues ago, but it's clear now that Lightning Coil is the top of the pure defensive armors. Ivory Tower is second. Now, whether you call Ivory Tower pure defensive or not is an open question. I'm going to for the purposes of this video, but you can definitely make a case that that's wrong. It's certainly not a defensive item if you're playing it on a Righteous Fire build. It's where a lot of your damage comes from. Then you have Fourth Vow with Incandescent Heart and Cloak of Flame close behind. Now, Incandescent Heart is one of those items that is in the hybrid section, where it is both providing a defensive bonus and also providing meaningful damage, but it only provides a defensive bonus once you've got a considerable amount of chaos resistance on your character. Of particular note here are the things that are missing. Utula's Hunger is less than half as popular as Incandescent Heart and Cloak of Flames, and Chevron's Wrappings is only half as popular as Utula's Hunger. These two are items I was expecting to potentially see higher on this list, and we'll have to see how the league develops over time. Now, it's interesting to see that Replica Dragonfang's Flight, despite the nerfs that item had in patch 3.23, it's still more popular on day 10 than it was last league on day 10. And this is one of those cases where the item is just much more known about. People are thinking about it in their builds, people are actively trading for it, and as a result, it's being used by more people than it was this time last league, even though the item is objectively worse. Now, the biggest shake-up to the meta has been the introduction of Transfigured gems, but so far, these haven't had a huge impact on the meta. I don't think that this is because those new gems are bad. I think it's that players are still solving them. From speaking to players, there's been an overwhelming preference to start with a tried, tested, proven, safe league starter, and then from there to investigate unproven alternate gems on second and subsequent characters somewhere down the line. Scourge Arrow of Menace has taken over as the most hyped of these gems and the most popular of them, and we'll come back to which of these are seeing particularly much use later on. This has replaced the pre-league hype that existed around Caustic Arrow of Poison, although that one is still doing well as well. Both Scourge Arrow of Menace and Caustic Arrow of Poison are working fine. It's just that the near consensus is emerging that Scourge Arrow is the superior of the two, and they compete to do basically the same thing. Stormbrand of Indecision and Penance Brand of Dissipation are doing very well too, and both of these are popular on the Inquisitor Ascendancy. But what's going to be really interesting is seeing how these evolve in patch 3.24. There's a factor that I think people often miss in the way the meta evolves, and that is that the builds that are considered to be the best by players get optimized the most. For example, Righteous Fire was probably never the very best skill gem in the game, even a couple of leagues ago when it was on top in popularity. What was key though was that it was a strong gem, and it also had an outstanding guide that was very easy to follow. So that meant that if you weren't sure what you wanted to play, you could definitely go with Righteous Fire as a proven, safe starter. Now for the 3.23 Transfigured gems, there's basically none of this optimization that's been done, not even 2 levels less than that. You can have build guides that are reasonably optimized and also relatively easy to follow, and that also show you pretty much every step along the way. Or you can have build guides that lose a little bit of that, but are still optimized, or you can have build guides that are just not very optimized at all. We're currently at that stage at the moment. Build guides that aren't particularly optimized, lots of little things that can be improved on them, and then once you get to that point, then you can start making it something that other people can follow. Well, that has a huge impact on how much these gems are getting played. By the time 3.24 comes around though, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all flows out, because by then, those of these new gems that are genuinely really strong will likely mostly, if not all, be known, and there'll likely be guides for a lot of them. And that's going to mean that 3.24 could actually be the most interesting league for the Transfigured gems, more so than 3.23 has been. All of that, however, is also dependent upon one particular outlier gem not being as good next league as it has been this league, because if Tornado Shot Deadeyes remain as good next league as they are now, then most people won't play anything else. Another major thing that's happened in this patch has been the overhaul of gem quality. Skill gems, broadly speaking, have had tremendous boosts added to their quality stats, but this has come at the cost of being somewhat more difficult to acquire quality on. Now, with the buffs that have taken place to gem quality, this has not resulted in Ashes of the Stars nor in Crest of Desire seeing a big uptick in use yet. I still think there's a potential that they might, and I'm going to be keeping an eye on that over the rest of the league. Both items are currently cheap at the moment. Ashes of the Stars did have a nerf compared to last league, it lost its reservation efficiency, but it's still in a very strong spot and I do expect to see it pick up in use. Tornado Shot builds gain a lot from quality, but they actually gain even more from Crystallized Omniscience, and so as a result, they're not really interested in running Ashes of the Stars generally. So here's what the Ascendancy Spread looks like. Deadeye is on top and it's not close. There are more Deadeyes at level 97 plus than there are for the bottom 10 Ascendancies combined. We then have Pathfinder, Ascendant, Inquisitor, Champion, Guardian, Elementalist, and Necromancer taking up the rest of the top slots. You'll see on the right hand side that this wedge expands out into its own mini circle, And here we have the tiny, tiny, tiny number of gladiators that people are playing. Gladiator is not in a good spot. Gladiator needs some loving because at the moment, almost no one is interested in playing it. Even people who enjoy the idea of playing a bleed bow character and who are definitely wedded to the power fantasy associated with the gladiator as an archetype, even those people by and large aren't interested in it. That said, it's been noticeable that the assassin has had an uptick in use. It's still in the bottom 4 ascendancies, but it's miles better than it's been in recent times. What happened here? Grinding Gear Games chose not to nerf the Deadeye in patch 3.23, and the ascendancy somewhat needed it. Last league it was number 1, but this time it's even further ahead than it was last league, seeing more play than the bottom 10 ascendancies combined. More problematic though is that the Deadeye ascendancy is now seeing more play than ascendancies numbers 2 and 3 combined. We haven't seen a situation like this, where one ascendancy has been this much of a boot stomping down on build diversity, really going back to about 3.13. That's about how far back you need to go to have the top build be as dominant as it is now. It's certainly nothing like some of the really bad times for build diversity, like patches 3.7, where literally 41% of the player base were playing Cyclone Slayers, not just playing the Slayer ascendancy, but also playing Cyclone on it, or 3.8, where Carrion Golem Necromancers were everywhere, but it is still the lowest build diversity we've had in a couple of years, and largely that's because Deadeye didn't take nerfs, and while Tornado Shot took a couple of very top-end nerfs, it is better in 3.23 than it was in 3.22 for most people who are investing 200 Divines or less. Another big factor compounding this is that while the Deadeye is extremely good, it's also just the fastest, and in the environment of softcore trade, that is everything. So you have an ascendancy that's in a very strong position, we have skills that are tied to it that are in a very strong position, and they play uniquely to the strengths of the softcore trade league environment. Basically, if Grinding Gear Games don't nerf the Deadeye and don't nerf Tornado Shot next league, then we're going to see a sharp decrease in the amount of build diversity, and we might even see a return to some of those 3.7, 3.8 type eras. At the lower end though, it really is only the Gladiator that is truly in an awful spot. So let's talk about the number 1 build at the moment. This is the Tornado Shot Deadeye. 3,251 people on level 97 plus are playing this, the most build concentration we've seen in quite some time, and almost universally, Tornado Shot players are Deadeyes. The build has spectacular damage projection, and it does enough damage and can get enough defenses to get by. The build often doesn't start with Tornado Shot. Most people who are playing this will level with Lightning Arrow and then swap over to Tornado Shot once they've got a reasonably solid endgame bow, doesn't need to be extraordinary, and also quality gems. Quality is incredibly important on Tornado Shot at the moment. The number 2 build this league is sort of 2 builds in one. This is Summon Raging Spirits, which is a top minion by a lot. Now there are 2 different versions of Summon Raging Spirits currently. There is a Guardian build that's based on instant application elemental damage, and there is a Necromancer version that is based upon poison damage. Guardian is a very smooth start, as its offense scales well with your character level all the way up to level 85. It then does start to fall off a bit, and if you're trying to go for absolutely extreme levels of damage, you're probably not going to get them on Guardian, but you can definitely get a lot of damage, enough to complete all of the major content in the game. There are other minion builds that are seeing some play, but it's absolutely Summon Raging Spirits that is dominant here. The number 3 build is also the top performer in the Sanctum, and this is Hexblast Mines. There's 1,101 level 97 plus players playing some sort of Hexblast Miner. The build is done a number of different ways, but Saboteur is the most popular. Now this build's in a really interesting spot because while you're getting started on it, you may actually wish to consider using one of the Transfigured versions of Hexblast, specifically Hexblast of Contradiction. But once you get established, you definitely want to swap over to your helmet to the best in slot item for this build, and that is Sandstorm Visage. Once you have Sandstorm Visage equipped, then you want to use classic Hexblast instead of using Hexblast of Contradiction. Hexblast of Contradiction is just not a very good gem when you've got the Sandstorm Visage equipped. It's worth noting that more than 60% of trappers and miners combined are playing a Hexblast miner specifically. So this is a considerable majority of all people who are doing damage through single-use proxies are using Hexblast specifically to do that. There are other ways to play Hexblast as well, focused either on the Transfigured versions or using Hexblast to ignite, but neither of these are particularly popular yet. People are sticking to the tried and tested version. Again, we'll probably see some more experimentation with this later. I am considering exploring the possibility of using Flicker Strike of Power as a delivery mechanism for Cast on Critical Strike Hexblast of Havoc at some time. However, this is very much something that is in the experimental build phases, and definitely not something I'm ready to recommend to other players. So what's the highest performing new skill? Scourge Arrow of Menace. This comes in next in the list of the top performing skills. There's a lot of early interest this league in Caustic Arrow of Poison played with Ballistae, and that remains solid, but it's mostly been eclipsed by Scourge Arrow of Menace, which does the same thing but does it better. Now this is played as a Pathfinder build with Poison Ballista Totems, but it is also played as a very, very different Deadeye Mana-Forged Arrows build. So there are different ways that Scourge Arrow of Menace is being used, and the more popular of the two is the Pathfinder Poison Totems, but both of these are putting up good numbers on their own. I wanted to quickly comment on Righteous Fire here, because this skill has fallen off any realistic top X list of skills for this league, but I don't think it's something that's totally in disarray. The Juggernaut version is mostly dead, but the Inquisitor one is still doing fine. It's just much more dependent upon getting uniques than it was in the past to get started. In order to get the sorts of damage that you were getting with gem level 20 Righteous Fire in the past, you pretty much need to have Utula's Hunger as your chest piece, Replica Soul Tether, and a couple of pieces of energy shield based gear, and you need to be on the Inquisitor. These uniques are not hard to trade for, but they're very, very important to the build, and Utula's Hunger appears at the moment to probably be a tier 2 rarity unique. I feel like if Utula's Hunger had been tier 3 rather than tier 2 rarity, then we would see more people playing Righteous Fire, but as it is, it's just not quite reliable enough to pick it up. Now, Utula's Hunger does tend to get replaced by Ivory Tower with a respec later, but that requires a quite different setup on your character. There are new mana-based versions of Righteous Fire that weren't possible in the past, but these are an entirely new build, they're not a variant build. These builds based around the Transfigured Righteous Fire gem will take some time to settle upon how best to build it. Overwhelmingly though, these builds are being played on the Hierophant at the moment. They're not tearing up the meta, but they do seem to be performing adequately. So this is one to keep your eye on if you're interested in the Righteous Fire playstyle, but you want to play it in a very, very different way. Next is Detonate Dead Ignite, which is the premier Ignite build so far this league. This uses the Vaal version of the original Detonate Dead gem, and is not really interested in Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction, nor is it particularly interested in Detonate Dead of Scavenging. It can use Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction, but the numbers will be worse, and that's why the vast majority of people don't do so. Detonate Dead of Scavenging is just somewhat of a different beast entirely, and it doesn't really fit onto most builds. Next, to round out the top 13, we have Tornado Shot, Summon Raging Spirit, Hexblast Mines, Scourge Arrow of Menace, Vaal Detonate Dead Ignite, all things we've covered. Penance Brand of Dissipation, Splitting Steel, Storm Brand of Indecision, Lightning Arrow, Corrupting Fever, and that's the physical damage over time archetype in general, Righteous Fire, Frenzy-based Mana-Forged Arrows, and Explosive Arrow Ballista Ignite. If we only look at new gems, the top 13 looks like this. Scourge Arrow of Menace, Penance Brand of Dissipation, Storm Brand of Indecision, Caustic Arrow of Poison, Spark of the Nova, Bone Shadow of Complex Trauma, Ethereal Knives of Lingering Blades, Rain of Arrows of Saturation, Ice Spear of Splitting, Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction, Ethereal Knives of the Massacre, Summon Raging Spirit of Enormity, and Storm Rain of the Conduit. Next, I wanted to look at some of the Breakout uniques of this league. That which was taken is the absolute Breakout unique of this league. This is being used by many, many thousands of level 97 plus characters, and it is currently second only to Watcher's Eye in the amount that it's being used on characters across the entire league. Darkness Enthroned use is also way, way, way up on what it's been historically, and there's a number of reasons for that. The other item that's really seen an uptick in use this league has been the Taming, which has always been good, but it fits very well now into many top bow builds. A final thought though, most of the time, if you look at the day 10 meta and you look at the day 50 meta, there are changes, but they're not truly massive. I think that this league, we're going to see bigger changes between day 10 and day 50 than is usual. And that's because there's a very large number of new skills and there's a number of major new interactions that are being worked on at the moment. For example, Cleave of Rage. Everyone I know that's a melee enjoyer that has played this skill thinks it is the best melee skill that the game has seen in a long time. But not that many people are playing it at high level at the moment. Likewise, there is some of the newly discovered tech around Arc of Oscillation, which has been doing really, really brilliant single and double target damage and has been really putting up impressive numbers for a number of people using it. So there's a number of things to explore over the rest of this league, and I do think we're going to see more development in this meta as the league continues on. Anyways, that's all I got for the moment. May your Vaal Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.